I am the program manager for CALPACT, which stands for the California Pacific Public Health Training Center. And we are housed out of the Center for Public Health Practice at UC Berkeley. And what we are is a 5-year grant from HRSA, from the federal government, to train public health professionals in the core public health competencies as defined by the Council on Linkages. And the way public health professionals are defined is very broadly, so it includes everything from EMT to social workers to people who work in public health departments to doctors and physicians. And today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Marcia Sturtevant, who I'm familiar with her trainings very well. She's an excellent trainer, and I'm going to just tell you a little brief introduction, and then she can go on to her training. Dr. Sturtevant is the Deputy Director of the nationally recognized Allegheny County Department of Human Services Office of Children, Youth, and Families. Allegheny County CYF is the second largest child welfare agency in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Dr. Sturtevant received her doctorate in education and development psychology from the University of Pittsburgh and holds a master's degree in criminology correctional science from the University of Detroit. Dr. Sturtevant is an assistant professor in the Department of Humanities and Behavioral Sciences at Point Park University, where she received her undergraduate education. President of the Black Child Development Institute Pittsburgh affiliate, Dr. Sturtevant lectures extensively on both local and national level of child abuse and neglect, racism and its effect on child development, developmental needs assessments, and culturally based intervention for at-risk families. Dr. Sturtevant has received numerous awards and was an invited participant and research panelist of the 2004 and I believe 2011 right? Oxford University Educational Roundtable in Oxford, England. Her dedication to helping families extends to the community by serving on numerous boards, including the Urban League of Pittsburgh, the Pennsylvania Statewide Adoption Council, the Pennsylvania Joint State Government Commission on Services to Children and Youth, and the American Association of Family Group Decision Making. Dr. Sturtevant's commitment to persons of color extends globally, and she was highlighted in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for her work with Somalian refugees. Dr. Sturtevant has committed her personal and professional life to improving the quality of life for children and being a voice for those who are unable to advocate for themselves. Dr. Sturtevant is married to Larry Anderson Jr. and is the proud mother of 2 sons, Larry and Marshall.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you so much. Wow. And good morning. Good morning. Yes. I'm glad that you're all here, and I hope that we have a wonderful session. I'll certainly will make my best effort to give you an enlightening and invigorating session. Generally, when I'm training or having discussions, I like also to have a lot of feedback and interaction. So please don't ever think that you shouldn't ask questions or give some feedback or so on. Now, my students always say, well, you can talk for 3 hours, and I can. It's no problem at all. But let's talk together, certainly. As Ms. Omalatati said, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and oversee child welfare services there in Allegheny County, and do some other things as well. But over the course of time, we have tried to transform the county services to children in Allegheny County by being more culturally responsive, being more inclusive, and also being more family friendly. In order to do that, we had to engage with community partners. And rather than being an isolated, exclusive agency, we've done a number of things to bring in people from different parts of the communities that the children reside in that we serve as our partners in the delivery of service. There has been some challenges, clearly, but the outcomes in improving children are well known, and we don't believe that we could have moved forward the way we have without engaging community folks in the delivery of service. Okay, and I guess I need to know who you all are in terms of where you come from, what discipline. Now, how many of you are child welfare or social work? Child welfare. Okay, because people was like, okay. Social work. All right. What disciplines or what areas?
I'm a social work administrator at Contra Costa Health Services Department.
Okay.
And I work in the public health division of Family, Maternal, and Child Health Program.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And I work at Early Head Start. So
Oh.
it's a nonprofit, fully funded program.
Right. Okay, great. Right. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm administrator, but I also do some clinical work.
Okay.
I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
Okay. All right. Okay. Other disciplines? Education?
I'm a health educator.
Okay. Okay. Juvenile justice? Anyone here from juvenile justice?
Well, we're not from juvenile justice, but we're a nonprofit entity that works with ex-offenders to help them with reentry.
Okay.
Adults as well as young people.
Okay. Okay.
We're ministry, so we kind of combine them too.
Okay, great, great. Anyone here from faith-based perspectives? That's you. Okay, good, because we'll talk a lot about that.
And me too, on that side.
Okay, good,
Right.
good. Okay. Are you guys going to be here for the 2 days? No, okay.
For now.
Okay, because I do a piece on spirituality.
When is that, tomorrow morning?
Yes, tomorrow morning.
Maybe.
Okay. All right. Okay, great, great. Did I miss any discipline or arena? Public health. I guess that would be you too. Okay, great. Well, welcome again. And today, like I said, we're going to start off talking about things that create barriers to community partnerships, and as well as when we break down those barriers, what happens in terms of outcomes for children and families when we are able to engage in community partnerships. We'll talk a lot about theory and as well as practice. So one of the things that we have to recognize as a significant reason why it's difficult for systems to engage in communities is because they don't trust systems, right? And for some populations, systems have done some pretty horrific things to certain groups that have resulted in what I term as cultural mistrust. Okay, but we're going to talk about that. This is just our agenda today. Our purpose is just to move forward, that I don't have all of the answers, and you have to create those answers for yourself. But we want to look at barriers and outcomes for community engagement. And we also want to talk about diversity and inclusiveness. When we begin our discussion, this is very hard to press. Okay. One of the areas that we're going to look at is an intervention strategy that has been shown to be effective across communities, across cultures, ethnicities, and so on. And we'll speak about that later during the presentation. And this afternoon, we're going to talk about a specific intervention strategy for community engagement for a very disempowered, disenfranchised population, specifically African American male children that are involved in child welfare. But this morning, let's begin our discussion around community engagement. Now, I talked a little bit already about this. One of the barriers, or a significant barrier to intervening or to engaging folks in community partnerships, particularly with a system such as child welfare, and I'll talk a lot, as you can imagine, about child welfare, because that's from my perspective, that when people don't trust a system, there are individuals who have had contact with those systems that produces a sense of mistrust, that things might not go well, okay? Well, those individuals certainly interact with other individuals in their communities, and vicariously, people begin to understand what it means to have a case, say in juvenile probation, what it means to have a case in child welfare, what does it mean when the school social worker shows up your door. And through their vicarious or direct experiences, they learn very quickly that this system necessarily hasn't produced good outcomes or will not produce outcomes for individuals. Now, does that mean that systems are necessarily bad? No, because when you talk about systems, you're really talking about people like yourselves, myself, who make up these systems. But what then would account for this sense of cultural mistrust, the sense that things just might not go well? And part of it clearly are policies and practices that are foreign or in opposition to the understanding of the culture. Okay? So to begin, let's start off with a little exercise. Everyone have a little piece of paper? Okay. And what I want you to do, I'm going to give you a little scenario, and you come up with your own understanding, okay? First of all, we're going to look at how decisions are made based on your orientation, okay? And how those orientations may differ from systems orientation, how decisions are made, okay? So for a moment, if you can imagine that you are members of a company, we'll call it Company X, all right? And last year, you, Company X, received a grant for, or a budget rather, a grant for $1 million. Okay, now this is not an exercise in reality. This is, just something that we're going to work through, all right? So, yes, so you have this $1 million project, and you're a very good company. You completed the project below cost and early. So you're excellent. Applaud yourselves for that. So you have, yes, because we don't get it much as social workers, right? Right. So there is a $200,000 revenue bonus, right? So you with me so far? All right. Now, instead of regenerating that $200,000 revenue bonus back into the budget, the board has decided to distribute the bonus to its employees. Like I said, this isn't reality, but this is an exercise, all right? And you are going to determine how that $200,000 revenue bonus is distributed. So I'm going to tell you about the employees of Company X. And we have 6 employees. Employees A, B, C, D, E, and F. Now, first I want to tell you about employee A. If we could describe employee A is sort of the supervisor of the project. And if you could quantify their work, employee A does about 40% of the work. Okay? They're the person that comes in early, leaves late, makes sure that things are together. If there's any outstanding tasks that have not been completed, employee A ensures that those things are done so that the project can move forward. Any questions about employee A? Okay. And then we have employees B, C, D, and F. Now, if you could quantify their work, B, C, D, and F each do about 15% of the work. Okay? And they're good employees. They're your very dependable employees. They come in when they're supposed to, leave when they're supposed to. They don't do a lot of extra, but they do exactly what they're told. And their attendance is regular. They're committed to the project, and they have no significant problems with their performance. Okay? Any questions about employees B, C, D, and F? All right. Then we have employee E. Now, employee E, while they didn't necessarily do any work on the project, specific work, employee E used their political and social influence to secure the project. Okay? The grant. Okay? The wine or the diner, so to speak. All right? Any questions about these employees or Company X? All right, good. So your job then is to distribute $200,000 between employees A, B, C, D, E, and F. Now, you don't need a calculator or anything like that, but before you get started, there is one thing I wanted to tell you about employee F, and it's just trivia information. Pardon?
Employee F or employee E?
Employee F. F, yes. This guy up here, or girl. Okay, employee F. Employee F, recently his father passed away, and his father was caring for his younger brother who's a college student, and now employee F has taken that his brother in. It was a very difficult time, and they are having some difficult financial circumstances. It has not affected, however, employee F's performance at work. It's just something that is unique about him rather than employees B, C, D, and E. Okay? Just some information, personal information about F. All right? Any questions? Okay, give yourselves a moment and distribute the $200,000 amongst those employees. There's no right or wrong answers, so don't worry about that. About ready? Okay, you don't have to be exact or anything. Okay. Let's see what we did, okay? Who wants to share how they distributed the $200,000? Who's first? I'll call on you if you know. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, how you would do it. How would you do it? James? Okay.
Supervisor 40,000 between B, C, and D. E, I gave 60,000, and F, 40,000.
Okay. Why did you distribute it like this?
I gave the most to E because I thought the other person got the grant. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I thought they deserved a little bit more than the rest. Supervisor did 40% of the work, gave him a pretty good chunk by themselves. The other folks did help out. They were extremely dependable, but they just did just enough work to get by. Didn't seem to do any more than that. And I felt F, I gave him 40,000 because he or she did good work, but besides that, they had another financial issue. Tended to be a soft case.
Okay. That's that social worker. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Anyone do any other? Dean? Okay.
I would pull a meeting together, and I would say, this is the deal, guys. I have an idea about how I want to do this, but I want to hear from you and see what your idea is. And I explained, you talk about production numbers over the year, et cetera, et cetera. And I said it's not just about this project, but it's about the community and what people have been contributing to the community, blah, blah, blah. So it's not, I'm not just thinking about this one isolated incident. So then I would explain, I would give the supervisor, like maybe 35 or something like that. It's based on the production. I know the supervisor has done half the work, but I would also explain that that's what the supervisor is expected to do. So therefore, and then I would say, so basically that leaves 29 or whatever for the rest of the year. And I would say now, I want to also call to attention the fact that we're a community, that one of our community team members is having problems, and I want you guys to say, how we're going to deal with this as a community. And in the future, I want us to talk about the guy who brought the person who brought the grant in and say, what do you think is fair when anybody brings in something?
Okay.
So I would try to use a consensual model, but at the same time, I would have a little bit of a top-down idea about what I wanted to do, and I'll explain that to them. That ultimately I'm going to make the final decision. But if they set a standard on a percentage of when grants, when somebody hustles and get a grant, that would be something I would probably stick.
Because you are an administrator. So that's what we did, right? Okay, good. Any other ideas or different ways? Jacqueline?
Torn with another person got the grant, but I would definitely be looking at what happened after that.
Okay.
Because I think some people can be corporate leeches too. They kind of inherit the power, but you still need to work. So there's a give and take there.
Okay.
But supervisor, if they are the one that comes in the earliest, stays the latest, that needs to be noted, because there are supervisors who still stop, whenever they feel like, and kind of assert their power that way too. So
Okay.
that's a leadership quality. So I'm a little bit torn between what I would give to E. You are the reason why we got it, but then what is our mission and our philosophy? If you're, let's say, if it was a nonprofit organization, I'd be a little concerned about somebody who wanted a large piece of the pie, who is kind of like, well, we're glad you brought it to the table, but we're hoping you did that from a really good place. Because then you set yourself up for every time they hustle and do that. And I've got the grant for the next year, so I don't have to do anything else. So I'm a little bit torn between, in that situation.
Right.
I was with you on that. I didn't think the person who got the grant should get the most amount of money.
Okay.
You don't do something, you're not, I know, I'm asking when I'm writing grant proposals, I'm not looking to get a bonus at the end of the grant proposal. You're writing it because you believe in what you're doing.
Okay.
I really like Dean's approach, and so I would definitely just validate that approach in terms of inclusion and how the decision, at least a dialogue, and then I would make, through just taking all that into consideration, and with that input, so I don't know if that input is a quotient, but I was thinking E. I would like to give E an incentive. So my thought though is less, like around 10%. So I didn't do it in terms of money, but 10% of the 200,000.
Okay.
And then A, I was thinking 40%.
Okay.
You know, of the 200,000, and it could maybe go to like 30, 35, and then B, C, D, and F. You know, like that 60% in terms of divvying it up.
Okay.
You know, and then I really like, because they might choose to start doing more when they see that there are incentives this way when we like come below cost.
Right.
So we might be able to start getting more money, more work from them than the 15% as a possibility.
Okay. Okay. So use some human behavior. Good. Right. Anyone have any other ways? So pretty much, okay, good. Now, your responses are all correct because they're all based upon your cultural orientation, right? And when we think about how we distribute rewards and punishments in a society, it depends on your cultural orientation. And there are two basic cultural orientations in the United States. One isn't better than the other, one isn't right, one isn't wrong. It's just two different perspectives. The first perspective is known as individualism. Okay? Now, individualists look at the world in this way. They look at the world from a perspective of individual achievement. Okay? That when you ask a person who is an individualist to identify themselves, how did they see themselves? Their identity is separate from the group identity. Okay? That they see themselves, their sense of self-concept is an autonomous sense. I am a member of CALPACT. Okay? I am a student at Berkeley. Right? I work at such and such. There's also a perception of independence. How well I do is determined by my own performance. How poorly I do is also determined by my own performance. Okay. Now, an individualist, their personal goals will always take precedence over the group goals. It's the idea of if I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of anyone else. Okay? And how they behave is predicted or predicated by what they feel is right or wrong. Okay? What they feel is in the quote, and we hear this a lot in child welfare, best interest. Okay? Right? Now, an individualist, if you are in a relationship and the cost of the relationship is greater than the outcomes or the benefits to you, you'll drop the relationship. You'll say, I've got to go. All right? Okay. Because, and many of us have had those relationships, okay? We know many individualists, right? Now, when you distributed the $200,000, if you took into account participation, okay, effort, that would be an individualistic perspective. Okay, that if you divided it, according to whatever formula, 40%, whatever, you've taken into account of individual effort. Okay, it's great, that's fine. That is one of the ways, and the primary way, by the way, that systems operate in the United States. We are an individualistic culture. Okay. That individualism is sort of the orientation that we follow. Now, that is not a problem, except if you're trying to engage with a population that comes from the other orientation. And the other orientation is known as collectivism. Okay. Collectivism. Now, if you try to define a collectivist cannot separate their identity from the identity of the group. It's very difficult for them to do that. If anyone has ever been on a gung-ho sports team, you know that you are the Ravens or you are the Steelers. I mean, you just can't separate it, okay? The Steelers, I have to come from my own, yeah, you know, people just can't, you know. Oh, you all have a team here too, right?
We do.
Okay. 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 I had to say that. You know? Okay, so you're here. So you're the Raiders. Yeah. But you see people who can't separate that. People often ask the question, do you see yourself as African American or female? Okay. And I have to think about, I can't separate that. Okay, so that would be a collectivist orientation. There is a perception of interdependence. How well you do is determined by how well others do, okay, and vice versa. Rewards, punishment, success, failure is collectively owned. There's collective ownership. Now, if your goals as a collectivist overlap with the goals of the group, you'll forgo your own goals for the benefit of the group. Okay, grandmothers who take in the 12th child, okay, is a collectivist. They finish raising their kids, but they have to continue to, you know, and they say, oh, well, I'll just retire next year. That is a collectivist orientation. And how you behave, your perception of what is your acceptable social behavior is determined by what you think others will think of you in the group, okay? So you'll look at that. Now, if you're in a relationship, a collectivist, okay, will say, this isn't working out for me. However, for the good of the group or the good of the relationship, I'll stay in it, okay? Right? Because relationships carry the greatest import. It's most important to maintain those relationships. All right. Now, for those of you who responded to giving F something, that would be a collectivist orientation, okay? If you looked at distribution evenly, that would be a collectivist orientation because the idea is everyone contributed in some way, so everyone should receive some of the rewards. Now, for many of the populations that interact with public systems, whatever it may be, they operate off of a collectivist orientation. However, the system comes from an individualistic perspective. Now, I have given this exercise, I can't imagine how many times. And I always use it in one of my classes, social work, nonetheless. And only one time in my experience did I have a pure collectivist response. And it was a young student, and I gave the exercise, and it was a male. He wrote down his answer, put his pencil down. And usually there's large groups, and we have discussion among the group and so on, and I give about 20 minutes, half hour for it. He immediately had a response, and I just noticed, I said, well, I wonder what, maybe he don't want to participate, or what's up with that? This not going to get him a good grade. But anyway, when he responded, I said, well, what did anyone have any other way of distributing the $200,000? And he said, I gave the $200,000 to F. He gave all of it to F. And all of the other students said, oh, poor guy didn't get out of class almost without getting beat up. And they said, well, he can do that because he's a chem engineering major and he's going to make a lot of money and, his money isn't important to him, da-da-da-da. And I said, okay, and it clicked on for me. I says, now, why did you give F the $200,000? And he said, because F is in need today. Okay? And it's my responsibility to take care of F, because tomorrow I may be in need. And we couldn't move forward until F is made whole. Okay. That student was from Ethiopia. Okay. A different cultural orientation. Totally different. Totally different. To give all of it to F. He didn't have to think about it. Okay, it's deep, right? Right. And that difference oftentimes is what we struggle with when we're working with families, kids, so on, from people who are working from a collectivist standpoint or orientation in a very individualistic perspective. Okay, those are some of the challenges. Any questions or comments? So if I'm in need of $200,000, I'm confident that you all, being collectivists, will hook it up for me. Yes?
One of the things I think that you could split hairs on in terms of just the whole theory and reality of life, from what I see, I speak about my own personal experience, are the lines that blur between dependence and collectivism. And between a Darwinian type of orientation, the individualistic approach, versus something that's really based on awareness that I'm actually doing something. Because you had said, basic, if I can take care of myself, I can't take care of myself unless I have others until I take care of myself. Right. But some people are like, I'm taking care of myself, and damn, you know what I'm saying? If you get eaten up by the shark, hey, that's the way it rolls, you know? And so those lines, you know, I mean, we could probably have a whole day talking about that in itself. But I think in reality, you know, that's what I see sometimes in organizations, and that's what I see. Hey, you know, this is all this cultural stuff is, you know, people are, we're all liberal, we're all social workers and everything. Oh, there's a job open for an agency for $180,000 a year. Oh, I'm gonna call my friend, you know, and I don't care nothing about the cultural environment of this. We don't have any Latinos around here, but I know one. But guess what? I'm calling my friend. They're not Latino. I'm gonna get my friend this job, you know. So
exactly, and that is something that we all struggle with, because, in fact, all of you pretty much gave both collective and individualistic responses, clearly. And honestly, it is difficult to operate from a collectivist standpoint in an industrialized, you know, culture, right?
Totally up in here.
Right, okay. Yes, right, it's very, yes. And individualism, those will argue that that is what built this country. An individualistic perspective, from the Protestant ethic, the harder you work, the more you should achieve. Okay, the more you deserve to achieve. So all of our systems are pretty much individualistic. It's not a bad thing, but people struggle with it when you come from a collectivist standpoint.
Yeah, and it is how this country, and I'll go on and say we, built systems, and at the same time, though, what happened to many, many other millions of people that did not benefit from that individual system when, you know, it was established, that weren't even included.
Exactly.
You know,
And
so I think that we have a lot of work to do.
Tremendous amount of work.
Well, it's like universal healthcare. Sorry, I'm in healthcare,
Yes.
so this is like a topic I'm passionate about. But like, there's so many other countries that everybody donates so much money, right? And everybody has at least like baseline healthcare.
That's right.
And if you want the Cadillac of care, then you can contribute your own money to get like excellent care, have dental and have eye and all that, right? But in our country, we don't want to help others. We don't want to say, oh, I'll donate $10 extra out of my paycheck every month, so the little boy can have health care. That's just not how our country was ever established. You know, it was that you work hard for what you get.
Right. And that's the debate that we see now with universal health care. That pretty much, you know, you wonder how, as social workers or how can you deny children health care? You know, it's the question. And it's the two philosophies that just sort of just bump heads. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and on that note, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, well, if that kid over there doesn't have this care, I might be sitting next to someone on the bus who's wheezing and coughing.
That's right.
There you
Still
go.
sick, and
Yeah.
you might get even more sick, and it's gonna cost me money. It's not even
you
about
got it,
that. It's
though.
like they just gotta die, and that's it.
Yeah.
But then there's that more macro level perception, but then there's the individual perception. I remember I working with kids, you know, in the criminal justice system and whatnot, and it's sometimes, you know, not all families are good for people. You know, I'm sorry to say it, you know, but cuts against a lot of what we. I mean, I'm not saying that there's sometimes people have to get away from a dysfunctional situation.
Yes.
You know, and as someone who's raised with, you know, a very collective and who's come up in a community more setting, you know, that can cut against a lot of value systems for a lot of us, whether it be religion. I think I'm speaking, you know, not just being African, but even in different cultures, whether you come from Sweden, you know, in certain countries in Europe, they have certain things like that or whatever. But I think you get my point.
Yeah.
So you're sitting there with the kid in an individual session or something, and they want to continue to go back into this dysfunctional situation, and you know for a fact that the only way this person is going to survive is if they get out of this particular environment, and they don't want to. They feel guilty about leaving behind people.
Yes.
Or how do you
Yes.
get them to exit,
Because you're a sellout.
but
when you do
still
that.
be connected in a certain way? How do you get them to say, you know, your brother who's a dope addict, you know he's calling for some, you know, he's telling you he's got to go fix his car, but you're working as an engineer making $100,000 a year, but you know your brother's a dope addict, and you're gonna keep sending him this money, you know, so it breaks down into that.
Yeah,
Those
and it's
small
very difficult in a system or a society that has ingrained that in all of the policies and practices. You talked about Darwinism. Social Darwinism was and continues to be a very influential perspective in all kinds of social policies. At least where I come from, social Darwinism is what built the city, you know, with the steel mills, that they believed that Andrew Carnegie and all those moguls believed that they were at the top of the food chain because they were just better equipped, that they deserved to be there. They were smarter, brighter, and so on. And the underlings were there to support the status quo. Yes. And when you look at these systems, in fact, we'll talk, because I'm glad you guys must have looked at my PowerPoints already. That let's look at 4 basic systems when we're trying to bridge the gap between philosophy and practice, between collectivism and individualism. Public health, education, juvenile justice, and child welfare. And I'll go over the first 3 very quickly. In public health, we know, that generally the overall philosophy is the idea that public health, there's an overall benefit if you provide standards for groups, although it may impede on individuals. Okay, it's an overall benefit to society. The idea of collective action and efficiencies. For instance, if one person does not adhere to the standards set by the group or the society, the system, then there's havoc. For instance, if one person doesn't stop at a red light, right? There's harm done to the group as a whole. Communitarianism, that what is good for the whole is good for the parts. That whole idea, even if you don't want to be part of that, such as childhood immunizations. Okay, the idea, picking up your garbage, right? Even a friend of mine was having this problem. He has an English garden on his lawn, which is, I call it weeds, but he calls it an English garden. You know, just flowers growing in. Well, the little community that he lives in, you have to have a standard, grass lawn, whatever. And he's fighting with the borough on this particular issue. But they said for the benefit of the group, it doesn't look right. So his English garden, I'll see if he still has it when I get back to Pittsburgh. The sense of fairness that the burden of these responsibilities should be shared by those who are able, so to speak. But those who are able, or the powers to be, are the ones that set the standard, okay? And also the harm principle that, and John Stuart Mills talked a lot about the harm principle, that really the only justification for interfering with someone's right to free choice or to choice is because it will do harm to society. So it's okay to harm an individual in order to protect the interests of society.
For example.
Yes, very good. Okay. And you can see those principles are pretty much from a Darwinistic, individualistic perspective. In education as well, we have moved, not a whole lot, but early public education. Well, first, there wasn't public education, I should say that, in the United States. It was, education was only reserved for men, for boys, first of all, and for the wealthy. And in fact, girls were taught very stereotypical things like how to sew and cook and take care of your household. But then when, during the 1840s, when the common school system came into place, or public school, it still was very prescriptive around who was educated and what type of education was given to people. And it was given to certain groups based upon what was seen as their role in society, what their role in society should be. The 1900s, we moved to something known as the social continuity of life, that education was for the purpose of maintaining the elements of society, and very much individualistic perspective. Those who could achieve would move on to greater things or move on to other realms. College clearly wasn't for everyone. In fact, high school wasn't for everyone. One time it was just grade school for the purpose of working in factories, on farms, and so on. And now we've moved towards standard, very individualistic perspective, standardized outcomes for children. That in order to move, everyone has to reach a certain standard, and it's translating into the educational format for children, very standardized. Okay. Individual perspectives or not. Now, when we look at juvenile justice from a systemic standpoint, early on, there was no such thing as juvenile justice, for one thing, that children were just seen as little adults. So they were given the same kinds of penalties and outcomes. And then along in late 1800s came social workers such as yourself. They called them the child savers. They said, hey, wait a minute, kids are a little bit different than adults, and we should talk about rehabilitation. Then in the 80s, because I'm from juvenile justice at one point, I really started out in juvenile justice, there was a lot about retribution punitive, okay? Even though we use the words rehabilitation, that you had to pay the price. So while you're paying the price, we're rehabilitating you, but punitive types of theories or practices. And then now we've moved to balance and restorative justice principles, where the good of the group or the community is responsible for taking in the pain and suffering of the victim, as well as rebuilding relationships with the victim and the community at large, because the idea is that it's not just a victim, that the community is a victim. And we can't control crime without looking at how communities, or active involvement, how communities can be actively involved. So we're changing some of the principles some of the practice philosophies, but by and large, it's still from a very individualistic perspective, which sort of hurts our ability to engage in community or to have community engagement. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on child welfare simply because that's my orientation, but it crosswalks because gathering from the information that you talked about this morning, everyone here just sort of works with families, right? Okay, and kids. So let's look at a historical perspective of practice in child welfare. That at one time, child welfare practices were very child-centered, meaning that all of the assessments and the intervention strategies to protect children from abuse were seen as being child-centered, meaning you focused on the child, that the child was the most important element of the intervention, why they exist, and so on, why the discipline existed. And the child orchestrated everything. We're there to protect the child. Now, in order to protect the child, the discipline believed that you might have to remove the child, right, from others because the child is the center, right? Now, we know from the research and the outcomes that that perspective was short-sighted because if you just focus on the child, you've left an important component out, parents, right? And just because removing kids was seen as the way or to save them, that we know years later those same children would come back with terrible outcomes. There was just as much harm. So we got a little bit smarter, I say. Then the discipline moved to what is known as family-centered intervention strategies, where parents took the center stage. We have to do everything to preserve the family. And how many of you remember family preservation models, right? You know, whatever it takes to preserve the family. Now, as you were saying, Dean, some families, some individuals you got to separate from, right? Right? Come on, right? It's just not going to work. And we saw the results, the unfortunate results for many children who were harmed as a result of that philosophical practice to maintain the family. Okay, the children were kept in places that just were not appropriate for them. Well, we've gotten even better, and now there's sort of an integrated approach to child welfare practices. Still not 100%, but more of an integrated approach, and we'll talk about some of those approaches later. That in order to advance the cause for the child or to protect the child, that you can't look at the child outside the context of their parent and their family, okay? So you have to provide intervention strategies that meet the needs of both, okay? You not only assess, but you also provide strategies that help protect the child in their own home whenever possible, safely, okay, whenever possible. Now, when we do this, however, this integrated approach of including families, we still have some challenges around understanding engagement versus dictating what services are necessary for families, okay? And we're going to talk about the philosophy because it's a very fine line. And people say, well, I'm here to help kids. I'm here to help families. And then you call in the families and they call them every kind of name you can think of. Oh, they really messed this up. Oh, we hate them. So why do people have two different perspectives? And I use the Ashanti proverb. It doesn't matter if the knife falls on the melon or the melon falls on the knife, the result is the same. So even in our quest to do good work, sometimes we do things we're not aware of that are just very harmful to families. And that's because of how we have internalized some philosophical practices. And I'm going to talk about those practices in traditional child welfare. These are hard pills to swallow for many individuals, and you can replace child welfare with whatever you want: juvenile justice, education, public health, and so on. But the history of child welfare is a history of paternalism. Okay? It's a very paternalistic discipline, very much so. The history, how many of you know about the American Humane Association? Okay. The American Humane Association, you know, the people that protect dogs and cats and, you know, okay, you know what I'm talking about? All right. AHA. Well, they're also the originators of child welfare. And in fact, they're, if you look on their website, you know, they now are primarily known for child welfare services. But when you press in American Humane Association, you know, Fido's picture comes up. All right? Because it started off to protect children, and then someone thought, hey, we might want to protect kids too. Okay? And it really, you know, there's a long history. A little girl in New York was found on the streets and so on. But if I always use that example because how far have we moved from the idea that children or families need this very paternal oversight in order to protect them? And let's define paternalism. Paternalism is defined as the process whereby the professional approaches the child protective service recipient with the attitude that it is the professional's opinion that carries the most import in the interaction. I am a social worker. I am a public health nurse. I am a psychologist. I am a teacher. I am a probation officer. I went to school for X number of years. I have these letters after my name. I have this experience. I know what is best for you. Okay? Paternalism, very much. Plans. How often do we include the people that we serve in the planning of the service? When you don't do that, it's from a very individualistic and paternalistic perspective. When you don't include communities, because no one works in a vacuum, unless you're Gilligan and those guys, right? People live within, the organism lives within the context of a larger society, a larger community. And when we think that we're doing well, even when we come up with these creative ideas, creative intervention strategies, creative plans, they really come from a very paternalistic standpoint. Now, we evaluate what's the problem, what's the risk, what's the harm, and then we come up with the answers, the solution. We go in, we already know what's wrong because we have our intake sheet. Someone told us this is what it is, and this is your problem, and this is how we're going to resolve it. Okay. Now, when we talk about engagement strategies, family-friendly, service-friendly, we really don't care. Systems really don't care. You know, even when you ask, and I'm saying general things. When you ask someone, well, Mrs. Brown, what would you think is the way we should go? Mrs. Brown can say whatever she wants, but a court, a judge, going to do what they feel right, social worker, and so on. So we give a lot of lip service to what service recipients think, okay? And this is a quote from Lisa Merkel, good friend, from the American Humane Association. She's the director of an intervention model that we'll talk about later. The family group decision making, we'll talk about that. But she states the traditional child welfare system often disempowers and disenfranchises families and communities rather than strengthen and sustain them. Sometimes when we think we're doing the best, we're actually providing more harm to families. Okay. Do we do that in your systems that you work in? I mean, that's the question. How much does our practice really do more harm than good? Okay. So to move to that answer, because they got quiet, you are thinking about something. I don't know. But I'm just doing the best I can, right? Okay. But we're going to talk a little bit more about it. Okay. And it's 10:15. You probably need a break. So we're going to come back, but I want you to think about this question at the break. Why are people poor? And not what my little boy said, because they don't have any money. But a much more, which actually is kind of profound. Yes, you're right. But why are people poor? Think about that, and let's take a break. Everyone ready for a break, I think? You're okay? 10, 15 minutes for a break? Okay. Does anyone have any issues or concerns before we leave that you'd like to? All right. So let's take that break and come back, and then we're going to go through an exercise discussion on that. Back. Whoops. Okay. Giving away my store before. Okay. So, why do you think people are poor? Other than because they don't have any money. Why are people poor? United States, richest country in the world. Why are people poor? Well, you all don't have poverty here.
That's right, no poverty here. Well, I think that people are poor because that it was organized in this country for people to be poor. You talked about earlier the Carnegies. So there's the Carnegies, the Mellons, the Rockefellers, the big organizations. So I think that it was designed for people to be poor. Mm-hmm. You know, when this country first got started, it first wasn't only black and white, as it more is now. It was like an upper class, and then it was the lower classes, which were many ethnicities, and then, you know, we could go into the details and all that kind of stuff. But I think it was really organized as such, and I think that through a more organized dismantling, you know, around the distribution of wealth, that there will be a change.
Okay.
So that's why I think
interesting.
Poe.
The Poe, yes. Well, when you thought about that, because I am an academician, so I'm going to propose to you 3 possible answers. Okay, and you decide where you stand on them. Again, there's no right or wrong. When you think about the theoretical understanding of any social position in the United States, there are 3 basic sociological perspectives that could answer or propose an answer to why are people poor? Why are there more minority children in juvenile justice, child welfare? Why haven't women achieved the same level of socioeconomic status as men? Okay, so you could ask several social questions based upon these 3 theories, and I'm going to just go over them briefly with you. You will be tested at the end of the session. No, okay, see. Just thought I'd get a charge out of you for that. Okay. And again, these are theories, okay? The first is a group of theories, and I'll preface this. There are many theories to answer this question, as there are sands in the hourglass. But we're going to collapse all of those theories into 3 basic domains. The first group of theories are known as structural functionalists or structural functionalism. Structural functionalist theories equate society like the human body. Okay? Pretend I'm society. Every part of the body serves a purpose. for the functioning or the operation of the whole. Even like your arms serve a purpose, right? Your legs, your heart, even your eyelashes and the eyebrows serve a purpose. Without those parts of the body ceases to function normally, okay? And it tries to bring itself to balance or homeostasis. For instance, if I were to lose a hand, my body would have a reaction, right? And it would do something to compensate for the organism to continue to function, okay? That's the analogy the structural functionalists use. That society is like a human organism, that every part of society is there in order to support the functioning of the organism or society. So, poverty or the poor exist because without poverty or people who are poor, society can't function. That the poor serve a purpose, and that purpose is to maintain the position of those in power. Okay? If poverty was eradicated, because can it be eradicated? Yeah, okay. I'm not supporting communism or anything like that, because people always start, okay. I'm just asking a rhetorical question, okay. A lady from Pittsburgh, she's a communist. Yeah, all right. Yeah, I know. When I get to the airport, I won't be able to board or anything, no. But technically we could, right? But will we? No, according to a structural functionalist perspective. Because without poverty, who does the work of the poor? Right? Think of the industries that are dependent on the poor. Just about everyone here has a job because someone is poor, right? Okay? It can be the same thing when we start to talk about why does racism exist? It's much more complex than I don't like you because of the way you look or the way you talk. It's supported by society in order to maintain itself. Okay? We could switch. There's a great movie that I show for long trainings called White Man's Burden, if you ever get a chance to look at it. I can't do it, but it's with John Travolta and Harry Belafonte. Limited release. Can't imagine why, but limited release. And it's a role reversal where blacks are the dominant culture and whites are the minority, okay? And it really speaks to why it's maintained. It's to keep divisions because those in power, while all the minorities are fighting, those in power are getting away with the cash, right? Okay. Sexism is also about keeping the power imbalance the way it is. That those in control perpetuate sexism in order to maintain their superior position in society. That would be how a structural functionalist would argue. If we solve sexism tomorrow, society can't function. Wait a minute, that means that certain people have to give up their position, which means I lose money, which means this institution no longer thrives, okay? So we enact policies, practices, values, belief in order to maintain the functioning of the organism, no matter how dysfunctional the organism is, right? That's one explanation. The second group of theories are known as conflict theories. Now, conflict theories stem from Marxist theories. Again, I'm just quoting the stuff, okay? And conflict theories pretty much says that people are poor because of the division in society. Two divisions, the haves and the have-nots, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Bourgeoisie are those who are in charge, set the policies, write the laws to benefit them. They own the means of production, control the economy. But in order to maintain their position, they have to have underlings, all right? And everyone can't be at the same level because the bourgeoisie want to maintain their superior position. But we know this, so there's conflict, okay? But to resolve that conflict would be against what the society would want, the society of bourgeoisie. That we begin to put things in place in society in order to maintain that division between groups. And until we develop a class consciousness, those who are the underlings, society will continue to maintain the superior position of the bourgeoisie. Conflict theorists would say sexism, okay, is maintained by the bourgeoisie, okay, to keep other people at their subservient position and keep them fighting each other, okay, right? For instance, professions. Who sets salaries for certain professions? Why do certain professions earn more than others? When you think about it, why does a physician earn more than, say, a teacher? Who makes up physicians? And men, right? So that's more money, okay?
And mainly white men.
Well, yes, yes. Some countries, and I don't know if it's still true, but for instance, in Russia, women were primarily the physicians, but it didn't command the same respect for the profession or the salary. So you can look at gender differences and see where the value is in a profession, okay? And conflict theorists would say that is orchestrated purposely by those in power. And they do that through political and economic force, right? Okay. You don't have poor people, you don't have anybody to blame, right? You don't have anybody to do your work. The last group of theories are known as symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionists examine how social institutions in the United States interact with individuals or groups based upon their position in society. How you interact, and the interaction, the quality of the interaction, the dynamic of the interaction of the 5 social institutions in the United States, and I'll give those here. Differ according to your social position. For instance, let's look at the social institution of politics, which is government, which would include child welfare, law enforcement, and so on. Let's use the example of law enforcement. If you are African American and male, your interaction with that social institution is different by virtue of the social position you have in society. Okay, think of it, and I'm not familiar with any of the neighborhoods, but think of the neighborhoods that aren't as diverse as others in this community.
West Oakland, East Oakland.
Okay. And I'm going to, pardon?
Richmond.
Okay, so you name, I don't know. So I would suggest that, say it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and James and Mose, oh right, are driving down the street. And what did you say? One of those, Richmond, did you say?
Richmond.
Richmond, 2 a.m. Let's give you a, what's your dream car? You have one? You don't have one? Corvette, red?
Of course.
Red.
Gotta have red or yellow. Convertible? Okay, all right. Since we're dreaming, right? Right? And you're driving down 2 o'clock in the morning, police pull you over. What do? Do you ask questions of the police?
For real?
Yeah.
What I did? Yeah, I'd ask you why you pull me over. Probably the first thing I'd say. I probably already understand it.
Give me your driver's license and registration.
I just do it.
Step out the car.
I just do it.
You just do it.
Right. Now, why?
Because my mindset tells me if I don't, I'm subject to be dead.
Yes. That's not funny at all.
But I mean,
That's the truth. That's the reality of it. Yes, absolutely. Now, law enforcement or the politics, the social institution, is made for everyone, right? However, based upon your social position, your interaction may be different. Okay, and that's what symbolic interactionists do. They merely examine to what extent does an individual's social position have a different interplay with social institutions, and trying to sort of understand that. Poor, the homeless, one of the barriers to receiving employment, say for the street homeless, is because they look homeless, right? Right? They don't have an address. So they can't get some identification. They can't, you don't have a phone, those kinds of things. Because of your social position, you're not able to navigate through social institutions as mainstream Americans would. Okay. Now, when we think, and I have a funny story. I have well, he's older now, but I had a nephew who was just at the age of getting his license. And he wanted to drive my car, and it is a little red convertible. It's not, with T-top. It's a little sports car. That's before kids. So, yes. And he just couldn't wait to get to be 16 so he could drive. He wanted, And he lives in sort of a mixed community, half and half. And by the way, Pittsburgh is not diverse like Oakland. You're black or you're white. Okay. And we'll talk about some demographics later. But I had promised him, I shouldn't have, but I promised, I said, sure, sweetie, you can, as soon as you get your license, you can drive it. Well, he got his license, of course, and he came the next day. I want to go to this party to drive. Well, I'm sweating bullets, oh my God. And I explained to him, now, I know you have diverse friends, male and female, and if you're driving, this could be a problem in certain parts of the neighborhood. So I want you to put this on the dashboard, and you keep your hands on the wheel in the event that you're pulled over. And you say, officer, please read the placard on the dashboard. And I had a placard laminated that said, this car is the property of Dr. Marcia Sturdivant. She has given permission to Justin to drive this vehicle. If there are any problems, please contact me at such and such. Now, people thought, some of my friends said, I said, hey, to save a life, right? That you have to understand, yes. Because many of our young people don't understand this particular dilemma, okay? They don't understand that your position in society has a different impact and there's a different interaction by virtue of race, class, and gender. Now, when we're talking about race, class, and gender, let's talk about something I call the Gordian knot of social inequality. When you're talking about any kind of social inequality, you're really talking about disparity related to race, disparity related to class, and disparity related to gender. Those are so intertwined that it's hard to separate them, okay? And if we're talking about community engagement, we also have to talk about isms. Okay, you got to talk about isms, because that's really the undergirding reason why we can't engage with folks, okay? And we're going to talk not about individual biases, but systemic biases or advantages, because I don't believe anyone is inherently evil or wake up and say, you know, I'm going to hurt this person, I'm going to hurt this system or this population. It's how systems are designed that inadvertently and sometimes very directly result in isms. And in a formula design, systemic advantage and access to power makes up isms. Systemic, not individual, systemic advantage and access to power results in isms. Let's look, it's very simple. Racism. In this society, if you're white, you have a systemic advantage over people who aren't white. Okay? Sexism. If you're male, you have a systemic advantage over females. My little, I must be dead because this thing isn't, okay. It's not feeling it. Classism. Okay, well. Did it do it? It came. Wait a minute. There you go. Okay. In this society, if you're wealthy, you have a systemic advantage over people who aren't wealthy. Okay. And we see this time and time again with criminal trials, et cetera. And this, okay. Age. If you're young to middle age, you have a systemic advantage over old people. And the older you get, you certainly start to begin to realize that. There's a systemic advantage, okay? Now, this one, some of us are in denial, but lookism. If you're young, thin, and physically attractive, I have an advantage over those who are not. Okay, very much true. I always examine newscasters, those who are the anchors, okay? They're always very attractive people, right? A certain look, okay? And for some channels, you can see there's almost a certain type of look. That if you don't fit that, you know, you're not. I want to see an old, heavy-set, dark skin sister, right? Black woman, right?
With locks.
With locks. There you go. In a wheelchair. In a wheelchair. And blind. As an anchor, right? It just doesn't happen. Right? It doesn't happen. Looks have a very critical part. And people will say, oh, you know, we can make light of it. But it's not just systems, because we internalize what systems tell us. So when we go knock on a door, and that fat, black, gray dreads woman in a wheelchair, we respond differently. This blind, I forgot, yes. Okay.
They did a study where they held pictures up to children, and they showed them, you know, bigger women, skinnier women, big men, small men, you know, variety. And the study of all, I don't know what the population of children was, but they picked the white skinny woman as being the most attractive
Yes.
of all pictures.
Yes, yes. And we've not spent, we've not advanced a lot from the Clark doll studies of the 50s. Yes, 1956, 55, 56, yes. Pardon?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes, and they redid it not too long ago. And for those of you who aren't familiar, for the Brown versus the Board of Education, that to prove, Thurgood Marshall was trying to prove that segregation was not just bad for black kids, it was bad for white kids too, right? So he commissioned some of his college peers or friends, the Clarks, Kenneth Clark. And Kenneth Clark did that pivotal study where he showed, they're like Cupid dolls, a black one and a white one. Same doll, just color differences. And he asked children different questions. Who is the smart doll? Who is the attractive doll? Who's the bad doll? Who's the doll that's going to graduate? Those kinds of things. Who's the doll that you want to look like? And overwhelmingly, children for good characteristics pointed to the white doll, for bad characteristics to the black doll. They did it redid it not too long ago, and unfortunately, some of those negative self-perceptions still are maintained, and are maintained across the board. They've had, and I didn't bring it with me, it's a video clip of children who are shown cartoons, and it'll show just individual pictures, and you'll ask the child, what is that person doing? And if it's a white face, in fact, there's one clip where there's some money on the ground, and the little boy is picking up the money. So they'll show a white little boy and a black little boy. The kids all say, for the white little boy, he's trying to find the money's owner. And for the black little kid, he done stole the money, right? Okay, yes.
That was so clear in the Katrina in New Orleans.
Yes.
So the white people, you know, they were rescuing themselves and they needed food for their families. However, the black people, they was looting.
Yes, right.
Exactly.
Well, even in China, the women over there are like lifting eyelids.
Yes.
They're putting leg extensions in to be, you know,
Yes.
look like more like a white
Yes,
American woman.
yes.
Exactly.
Bleaching their hair, doing other things, yes. It's profound. It's profound, very much so.
There was one study that came out of Oxford that they were talking about more the biracial look are more, some people are considered more attractive.
Oh,
Either
absolutely.
White or a dark look.
Yes.
And that is kind of taking, that kind of look is becoming more what people think, even though the colonial type of thing is still out there. And Jamaica, of course, there's the bleaching and all that kind of thing going on. But,
Yes.
so I don't know. I had one old professor who said he's created. He said we should stop using labels of race because it does us no good, and that he predicts there's going to be this thing called Epigenesians. Where it's going to morph into this whole different race, mixed people or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I have a group of, I don't know what you would call them, cultural thinkers, I guess you would say, but they're very much opposed to the term people of color.
Yeah, me too.
Because, it negates, yes. It's interesting things because when you look on TV, I really wish some of you were going to be here tomorrow because I do so much with that, but very subliminal messages around standards of beauty and color, you know, that, now I love Beyonce, so please, if anyone's related to her or you see her or anything, it's not that, you know, I just think she's a phenomenal talent. But look at her transformation over the years. You know, my kids showed me her latest album cover. I said, who's that? Who's that white girl? It's Beyonce.
Gotten lighter.
Very much so, yes. They've
I know she's thinner.
her hair is blonde. Whatever makeup they use, you know, she's lightened up. Yes, so it's the standard of beauty. And it's not Beyonce, it's the system designed to perpetuate this is the standard.
Alicia Keys, who I love.
Yes,
However, I love Fantasia.
I like her too.
And some
Yes.
other ones.
Yes, yes, because you have to fit, you know, the certain standards. So lookism is very much, it's not a trivial subject. And just look at, from a public health perspective, all of the young women who suffer because of those systemic descriptions or standards.
She was one that suffered.
Yes,
Yeah, Ivy.
yes,
Great talent, but is that real?
Yeah.
Indiana.
right,
Yeah, and Lettucey is just now starting to come up, and we'll see.
yes, very much so. Hmm?
And it gets deep, you know, and then you have Prince who was dressing up with high heels, bikini, and wearing rabbit fur, you know, and you know.
I can see that
I don't
album.
mind, look, I don't mind.
I know y'all don't mind.
Women's hear you.
it gets more into the thing of as he start, this is my personal opinion, and it's something I have read from music journalists, that as black men, he really was more, coming off with a black image, he would have been more of a, threat in some ways. So in order to market that, in the 80s, he started, which I don't really think he needed to do. He probably would have ended up,
Yes.
but to break the MTV market and those type of things.
Michael Jackson.
He really,
Well, that is the
he
question.
Had to be this non-threatening,
Right.
light-skinned brother who was
Right.
as
Became a
girl as
woman,
he man
as a
is,
boy,
you know what?
and
Right.
Michael Jackson did the same thing.
And so, it gets on that deep level. The danger, I guess, is not just the lack of awareness about what's happening.
Absolutely. Right. All the young girls who are starving themselves to fit a standard, undergoing all kinds of operations and so on. Yeah. And the question is, despite the talent, would he have made it or not? We don't really know. You know what I mean? So.
Reggae music's not going to get out there on the market. Not real roots. Now it's really about the dancehall rap reggae that is being promoted. So don't get me started.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go on to the next thing, but before I do, I have to create controversy because that's my job.
You already
No.
have.
Because that same little think tank, would Barack Obama have been elected had he been a dark-skinned male? I don't have an answer. It's just
The only thing is he got a dark-skinned wife. Yeah.
well, that was the other question. If Michelle had been more Beyonce-fied.
Oh, then. Yeah, and if he was dark-skinned, because Clarence Thomas.
Yeah.
So yeah. You got to have one or the other in terms of the lookism.
Yes. The question, the whole point, whatever, the debate is that it looks based upon standardized approvals is an important consideration. Just as ableism, the physically challenged certainly don't have as many advantages systemically. And we're a very pro-Christian society. So if you're not Islam, Jewish, whatever, that you don't have the same advantages systemically as Christians. Sexual orientation, you don't have the same advantages if you're homosexual, okay? Now, so the question is, America for all people? When we talk about poverty, and I'm going to skip over a couple of these. Right? So when you are trying to say, well, why won't they accept the services? Why won't they just do this? Why can't we get them involved? Because America is not the same for everyone. That when we talk about engagement, we have to talk about how systems have disenfranchised, alienated people. And we not only have to talk about it, but we have to acknowledge it and acknowledge it to the consumers or the people that we serve. Okay. Now, what I want to do, let me see if I can go through some of these very quickly. And these are just slides on poverty issues, the extent to which poverty is in our society, and the information is a little bit old. But 37% of all children live in low-income families. 85% are living with one working parent. And it's not about the value, but the fact that if you're living with one parent who is of a gender that does not make the same as another gender, that puts you more into poverty realms. Meaning, if you're living a single mom, there's some implications. And poverty is not just related to income, but how much you spend in order to survive, okay? And when we think about poverty levels, 2006, $20,000, it's a little bit more now, but it costs about double that in order to survive. And the poverty level incomes, or poverty level, has been calculated on a very antiquated formula. Food and housing comprise about 36% of the expenses. These are things that you can't do without. They're not luxuries. So the poor spend a greater percentage of their incomes on the necessities of life, so to speak. That's all I'm saying. And even they've done, has anyone read Nickel and Dimed? Okay, very interesting. Researcher went out to see if she could live off of the minimum wage. Can't do it. Okay, you have to have several minimum wage jobs. Okay, and since 2000, we've not done anything to eradicate or reduce poverty. In fact, it's increased. In the last 5 years, after hitting a low in 2000, we've added about 1.4 million to the rolls of the poverty. And the largest increases have been in areas where we typically didn't look at poverty, like the Midwest and rural poverty. Sometimes we don't talk a lot about that. Rural poverty is uniquely different than urban poverty. And the debate is which is more survivable. You know, there was a good show, I think it was Sunday, on immigrant children, workers, migrant workers, and how they have children who are doing the bulk of the work, because that's the only way the family can survive. If you're getting $3 or whatever, a bushel, that they have little kids who are out there working, and they're not in school. Aside from the public health stuff, they're getting all kinds of ailments as a result of the pesticides, and you know, you're out there working hard labor for these children. It just is disheartening to see, and the fact that it just perpetuates those separations and isms. The rise was greatest among parents who are employed and those who do not have a college degree. So the more that we make a college degree necessary in order to survive in society, the more we're creating the roles of the poor. And you can probably see, since in some of your own circles, college circles, the face of college students is uniquely different, at least as long as I've been in higher education. It's more, and I should say it's a little private. Of course, I teach at the University of Pittsburgh too, but more and more college is becoming a luxury of the wealthy, right? Okay. And we know in poverty's increased for white and black children at a greater increase. However, immigrant children, Latino children have very high rates of poverty, and it depends regionally, and we don't need that. Okay. So let's look at what does this all translate into for, say, child welfare. And again, you can change that to other disciplines. But when we think about all of these differences, disenfranchisements, that in child welfare, poverty is usually the reason people say that's why folks come in. That child welfare is really a reason, poverty is a reason people come into child welfare. Well, I would argue differently based on these numbers. And you just tell us. Okay. When we look at placement rates, meaning children who have been removed from parental custody, children, African American children, Hispanic and Latino children are placed about 56% of the time versus 24% for than white children. Okay. They stay in care longer, almost twice as long as white children. And for those cases that are open long, a year and a half, 18 months, and there are some significant or critical regulatory implications of that, because the longer you have your case open, that's when the system legally has to move more aggressively, like terminating your parental rights and so on. That African American, Hispanic, Latina cases have their cases under government supervision twice as long as white children. Now, people will say, and there's a recent study from Harvard that says, oh, it's not poverty even. That in fact, it's racially assigned, that black people just abuse their kids more. And this is a Harvard study. So, and then other studies say that it's poverty, that because there are high pockets of poverty, poverty is correlated with child maltreatment. That's why there are more minorities in child welfare. But even when you control for poverty, say if you come in, Black, Hispanic, Latino families are less likely to leave child welfare. Once you're in, sort of like the Wizard of Oz. Now, what would that all mean to folks? Well, if you're involved in child welfare, juvenile justice, etc., it's a multi-billion-dollar business. Social workers don't like to hear that, but it is a business. Look at the industry and go back to those 3 groups of sociological theories. People make money. You know, it's heart-wrenching. Now, I love kids, and I'm here to help children. But I get a paycheck, right? All right? And think of all the other industries that are created as a result of child welfare. It's multi-billion-dollar business, okay? And how does that impact then individuals? People who are directly involved in child welfare have negative outcomes. For instance, if you, or as a parent, have a case or have something we would call an indicated report, it's like a guilty kind of thing for those of you who aren't in child welfare, that negatively impacts your employment opportunities. Sometimes it negatively impacts your housing. So it impacts your economics, which in turn impacts your child, okay? Also for kids who are involved, if you've been in foster care, group home care, children don't necessarily come out better, right? The large majority have very difficult psychosocial problems as well as economic and educational disadvantages. Now, when we think about the indirect effects, we know the direct effects. When we think about the indirect effects, why wouldn't certain groups of people, even those who are not statisticians, data collectors, say there is no way I'm letting that public health nurse in my house, that child welfare worker, the deacon or the pastor, who do you represent, okay? It's cultural mistrust. It's not individual, that the culture of the society has indoctrinated a sense of mistrusting systems. And you can see from our discussion so far, rightfully so, okay? How do we break that down? There's also psychosocial maladjustment. And I don't know about you, but many of the families that I work with, that there's just such a profound sense of sadness. You know what I mean? And they move from one crisis to another, right? That it's just amazing to me that people can get up in the morning and here we're supposed to be helping. And many times our help results in long-term psychosocial maladjustment. There's a little boy at my church, and I work in the system, but I didn't know, you just don't think about, I don't think about children. In fact, I don't like to call them foster kids. No one's a foster person. They're children who live in foster care. But the extent of children who are in, say, my little personal circle that are involved in foster care, it's just, it's outstanding. It's unbelievable. Someone told me, well, I can't make practice next week because I have my visit. Why should children have to grow up like that? But this one little boy, he has bonding issues. And wherever I go, he's right there on my leg. He's about 3, DeAndre, he's about 3. And very much, that's a psychosocial maladjustment, okay? Because now I'm not a stranger. But 2, 3-year-old, you're supposed to be a little leery of strangers. But he immediately, someone who shows care and concern, he latches to. And now, in fact, I wasn't there last Sunday, and they said it was awful for him. Where's Miss Marcia? Very difficult. And of course, there's an economic impact if you are involved in systems. Think of all of the meetings, the time that's spent trying to navigate through whatever intervention strategies or engagement and so on. And oftentimes we don't hit the mark because of very distinct kind of biases and not understanding the pain. And I'm just going back here because I'm going to show you a little video clip so that we can talk about the impact of some of this pain. Let me see.
Good morning, girls and boys. My name is Miss Stratford. Now, this summer, we are going to be familiarizing ourselves.
See if I can turn
I
up the
believe
light.
It's just the finest little book ever come into print. It is entitled, Why My Life is Like a Bowl of Cherries. Now, doesn't that title just give you a thrill? Excuse me, darling. When the teacher is speaking, the polite thing for girls and boys to do is to shut their little mouths and listen. You understand?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, once we are finished with this book, we are going to be devoting our time to writing our memoirs. This is where you will indicate to me why your life is like a bowl of cherries. Let's get this class into some sort of order. Now, son, you're a tall boy. Why don't you swap seats with that little girl back there in the class? Go on, pick up your stuff and move on back. And you with the hearing aid, why don't you have a seat back there? Just crank up that little thing of yours. And now, you sweetheart, why don't you have a seat up front here? Oh, my, you're a big girl. I'm sure you'll see just fine in the rear aisle. Go on. And now, you little girl, why don't you have a seat in the back with your friend? Now, isn't this much better?
Yeah, lovely. Shut up.
Colored girl, didn't I just tell you to hush up?
I wasn't saying nothing.
Well, now I distinctly heard you whispering. Stand up and tell the class what was so important that you had to interrupt me again.
I already told you. I wasn't saying nothing.
I know you did. And I want to hear what it was. We're all waiting.
She already told you.
I think she can speak for herself.
All right. I'll tell you. I was saying, Everdeen, what you got to write about? But in the 6th grade, your whole good-for-nothing life ain't got no daddy. Never goes anywhere but where your feet take you. Only this money ever belonged to you in the whole world was $20 you got yourself in a birthday card from your uncle last year. It really wasn't for my birthday. Really. It was for laying on his lap and letting him spank me with my underpants down. Now here you come along, shoving me in the back of the room where eyes can't even see good, which means I'm probably not gonna graduate this summer neither. Just cause you ran how some white man say life be like a bowl full of cherries, I got to come up with some big hit saying, well, fine. I just write down how happy I'm gonna be to get $20 more on my birthday. Never mind what he got planned for me this year. And I'ma write how maybe the new man my mama said might stop drinking and treat me nice. And maybe he gon' die and take us off the welfare. And at the end, I'm gonna be sure and put life show is a bowl full of cherries. But to tell you the truth, Miss Strap, I think you and that book and this whole class be a bowl full of shit.
Go to the principal's office. Now.
Didn't you hear a damn word she said?
Excuse me.
She told you the best truth she knows. And you don't got no right to put her out or call her a liar neither. My mama says folks that treat people bad only do it because they're ignorant. So I'm gonna help you. She's gonna sit up front where she can see from now on. She ain't gonna go by color girl no more neither. You're gonna learn her name. I don't know about you, but all my friends have names. And this just so happens to be my best friend. Her name is Elvedine.
Okay. So you can see sometimes people walking around with pain, haven't talked about it, this coming from our own perspective, okay? As well, I think that clip illustrates how collaboration, standing for others, is an important factor in engagement.
What was the name of that? Where's that movie from?
It's called The War with Kevin Costner. Yeah, The War with Kevin Costner. And while that was an extreme example, but you know, how often don't we call people by their name? Okay, that we label them. And that one scene where all the black kids are in the back, I can just remember that so vividly, you know, as a child, you know, that, okay. And who advocates on behalf of those families or those kinds of kids? Now, one of the areas that when we talk about engagement is to understand not only the direct effects of disengagement as a result of disempowerment, isms, and so on, but what are the indirect effects? Because you just don't go unscathed. That you're taking in all of that stimuli, okay, as a disempowered person. And you have to understand that how people react to being involved in systems, and the people that we're helping also have to understand how that has had some import into their own perceptions. Now, when we begin to talk about a couple of things, okay, with working with certain populations, we have to talk about their cultural perceptions and adaptations. Okay, now these cultural perceptions are things that can best be described as internalized racism, okay, or internalization of negative societal images, okay, or definitions. For instance, for African American families, and there are other terms that can be used for other ethnic groups, okay? But one of the things that we talk about when we're trying to engage with community is the idea of a sense of maafa. And maafa is a Swahili term for a great disaster of death and destruction, misfortune, beyond human convention and comprehension. Something so horrific you can't even talk about it. You know, you can't even speak it. Maafa is perpetuated systemically, okay? There is individual ma'afa and collective ma'afa, okay? Ma'afa is perpetuated by an ever-present disregard for the right to exist, okay? And again, you can apply this to other disenfranchised populations. Ma'afa is systemic and it's perpetual. It stems from history. Now, we have a collective ma'afa experience as African Americans, which would be the history or institution of slavery. And while that institution has been legally eradicated, the mental institution of mental slavery continues, okay? Now, so while you are free from legal slavery, if you believe in all of those things that have been indoctrinated in society, what they say about what it means to be black in America, when you begin to see that, have it done to you over and over, you internalize racism. Okay? And when you internalize racism, that is the psychological response. There's a behavioral response known as cultural alienation, that you begin to behave in ways that support self-defeating behaviors or racist behaviors, okay? Clear example. If you believe by virtue of race, you're able to do things that, or can't do things based on race, that's internalized racism, okay? Great example. And we can measure people in cultural alienation, that you become so alienated from your own culture that you perform in ways that are self-defeating. Cultural alienation is highly correlated to self-defeating and self-destructive behaviors, drug and alcohol abuse, child maltreatment, marital discord, academic performance. Now they're looking at cultural alienation as being associated with physical symptoms, hypertension, heart disease. It's deep because the mind has great influence on how you feel about your how that affects your body, but also how you take care of it. Okay, an example of cultural alienation. This is a funny example, and everyone here will have some ideas or experiences. We were getting a new roof on our home, and my husband and I, we called Sears to get this new roof. And I don't know if you've ever had Sears do any work for you or any kind of home remodeling. But any of those companies, you pay for advertising, for whatever. I don't know, the air, or I don't know, airspace, whatever. So the guy comes out in his truck, and he gives us an estimate. And I don't know, this is not a gender-biased statement, but I don't know, I call it collectivism. The men on the block, I don't know, they came over to examine this estimate. Not that they were going to pay for anything, but they wanted to be a part of this. So they're standing in our driveway, and my husband and I, he has the estimate, and we're looking at it, and we're thinking like, we don't want to buy a new house, we just want to get the roof fixed. Okay, I mean, it was just astronomical. So as we're standing there in the driveway, an independent contractor in his truck comes up, an African-American gentleman, and he comes up the driveway and he says, I was just waiting for Sears to leave. I noticed them across the street. I'm an independent contractor. I know that I can give you a better deal. If you would allow me, I will, give you an estimate. So I said, sure, go ahead. So he goes in his truck, gets his little equipment, his ladder, does his little thing, comes back, writes a very professional estimate just like Sears, and he says, this is what I can do. No pressure, you call me if you want me. And the estimate is about a third of what Sears, and the person from Sears happened to be a white man. So we're sitting there, and for me and my husband, there was no question. It was a matter of economics, right? We're going with the independent contractor. Well, one of the men from the collective group, who is, well, he's retired, but he was a professional person, worked in a bank for years, deacon of the church, upstanding, intelligent citizen. Says, now, brother, to my husband, if you want this done right, you better go with that white man. Yes. Now, and I love this person. He's just the sweetest. And my husband, who has heard me lecture, gasps. And he says, she's going to get them slides, man. She can get them slides out. And we began to talk. I felt like, oh, here we go. Cultural alienation. Okay? That is a sort of benign kind of example, but it's very, can be a very severe form. They recently did some research on students, I believe it was through BET, Black Entertainment Television, and college students. They were given pictures of a physician and told that tomorrow you have to have a life-altering operation. Without it, you will die. Which physician would you want to do the surgery?
The white man.
And they had a white physician and a black physician. They sort of tried to get them to look the same, you know, nondescript individuals. Overwhelmingly, people selected the white physician. That would be, yes, the white physician. Cultural alienation.
The white man physician?
The white man, yes. Now that's interesting. Maybe I'll do a follow-up and see how it would be with women. I can already guess. They're going to pick the man, black or white.
Yes,
You over the woman?
not go to a woman
No.
physician.
A cardiologist,
Period.
get out of here. You know, right. And women, we internalize sexism.
That's right.
Okay? That's deep.
Ooh, I don't want no women as my best friend.
There you go. Yes. Isn't that something?
Women say that.
Right,
Oh,
right. Oh, a woman boss is the worst boss in the world. I hear that, oh, you know, except for you, Dr. Sturtevant. Well, I'm not offended then. This is up for me, yes. And other groups also have that same response. Hispanic color gradient. The lighter you are, the more preferable. You know, you're deemed more smarter, more attractive, so on. Asian, huh?
Filipinos.
Yes. Asian yellow peril, same thing.
Now, what is that?
Where you believe by virtue of your ethnicity that you aspire to be with the dominant culture. Lighter skin, rounded eyes. Okay. It's very deficit-based, huh?
And there's some other interesting connections with that. You know, several years ago I was in Vietnam and I noticed that there was some like really dark Vietnamese and whatnot, and I was like saying, well, what's up with the dark and light? And the guy was saying, well, people that are working in the fields get dark, so this becomes a class issue.
Class, yes.
So if you see someone dark, then you can assume, well, they're out in the fields. They're
Right.
not a professional in the office.
Right. Right.
So it's
Yes, it's all ingrained. Yes.
Some of those types of things.
Right.
Some of those cultures.
Right. And when we look at that, if we look at it from a conflict theoretical perspective, identifying with the dominant group or who those in charge. That's why conspicuous consumption. I don't think because we're all older here, except maybe you. But I always, look in classrooms. What's the difference between Nike and Walmart shoes? Oh, kids get upset. Well, that Nike shoe is better.
I think I should be better.
Walmart, I can't wear a Walmart shoe or whatever. I said, well, there are only so many shoe manufacturing places. Right? They just put, okay, and conspicuous consumption because we want to identify with the dominant group. Native American internalized colonialism, perpetuating colonial activities on people who look like you. And the other thing is if all of these are examples of cultural alienation. that when you're culturally alienated, you also behave in a way that is defined as spiritual disorientation. You become, you develop a disintegrated spiritual self, sense of self. And spirituality is different to religiosity, so we're not talking that. But how do you view yourself in terms of the universe? Are you connected to something? Do you serve a purpose? Are you part of that higher power, that higher order? Are you worthy? If you feel that you are not, that's spiritual disintegration, and you develop what is known as spiritual disorientation. Now, we've done studies on spiritual disorientation. Higher you are in cultural alienation, higher you are in spiritual disorientation. Black church folks, you say they're highly spiritual?
Not necessarily.
No. Right?
Very religious.
Right.
Not
Or
necessarily spiritual.
Right.
Religiosity.
Right. There you go. Yes, exactly. Because we'll say, well, Sister so-and-so, you didn't have to break the kid's arm. I mean, why you do that? Okay? Or having very negative self-perceptions about themselves, and you translate it to the children. So that's how that, and we've shown that African-American church people who measure very high in spiritual disorientation have very high rates of child maltreatment. Yes. And we do a number of things. You can deprogram folks. It takes some time, but you can deprogram folks. Now, having said all of that, we need to talk about all of these things in order to engage populations that generally don't want anything to do with, quote, systems folks. And there are several ways to do it. And one of the ideas that we have instituted, and it's been shown across actually not only the country but the world, is something known as family group decision making. It's an intervention strategy. And I'm going to go through these very quickly, so I'll be skipping over some slides in the interest of time. Oh, these are my recommended strategies. And basically, to engage, you have to talk about isms. You have to open and constructive dialogue about racism, classism, sexism. Okay, and not warm and fuzzy, but down and dirty talk about it. Train and educate agency staff and stakeholders about the institutional and structural racism, because a lot of times people can't really get to their own biases, and it's much more complex than that. But you have to talk about that and how certain groups are in an advantaged position because of structural racism, and have community and system partners involved in the creation of policies, practices, involvement in contracts. That if it's only systems driven, we're not going to engage. And finally, hiring helpers and healers at all levels of organizational and community structures in the delivery of service. Okay. If the helpers only look like the people in systems, you're not going to.
Dr. Garcia, can we be back in touch with you about these recommended strategies, some of the positive outcomes in different places where
Yes.
you're beginning to see results?
Yes,
I
yes.
think that, I know that that's what a lot of us may
Yes, yes, absolutely. And let's go to that, because I have one that we're going to talk about before we leave, and the other is this afternoon. And these are just some very basic steps. All the things that we talked about, community engagement. Know who you're working with. Do your research. And get others to help you with your research. If you don't know something, honesty is always the best policy. Partners have the same skills and needs as professionals. I don't agree with getting volunteers. You get a check. People who are partnering with you should get paid too. Okay? Okay, let me talk a little bit about family group decision making. Family group decision making is an intervention strategy that was started in New Zealand by the Maori culture. And it was a result of them having high rates of children removed from their tribes by their local child welfare agency. As well, they had a very difficult relationship, at best, I should say, with their community, between child welfare and the community. And what they found was that whenever a worker from the system, so to speak, would try to engage with an identified mother or father, that person always brought numerous individuals with him or her to come to some resolution. And the system will say, well, no, this isn't their case, it's your case. But the culture was unable to separate. Okay, they were very collectivist, that when the mom showed up, the tribe would show up, okay, ready to work. And finally, the system says, you know, this is an opportunity for us to change the way we do business. And family group decision-making differs from traditional approaches in these ways. And it's been found to be very acceptable by people of minority cultures, for lack of a better word. Okay. Now, these are the beliefs or values of family group decision-making. The families have strengths and they can change. It's a very advantaged or strength-based approach, I should say, and that you operate off of what's right with the family rather than what's wrong. It's very empowering, and when you engage with folks and allow them to deliver or construct their own delivery of service, that you receive better outcomes. And these are the basic principles. Families have to be the architect of their own services, that you don't go in and dictate, that families have to create their plans. Family sovereignty is fundamental, and if we're working with children, that we have to ensure that children see their parents and their families as the authority, not the system. Okay? And these are just things that it was started with CYF, but now it's used in juvenile justice, domestic violence, custody, health care. What is it when you're dying? Yes, yes, yes. Let's see, I forget. Respite care and hospice care, yes. And it's used throughout the United States and some other countries. Now, I'm just going to go over the model because we don't have a lot of time. I'm sorry. I apologize for the sound, but this is what we found out. That when we use, these are the outcomes that you're talking about. When we use family group decision-making versus traditional services, families, the idea that families will put their kids at risk doesn't happen. Because it's human nature to protect children. An individual may have a problem, but when you bring an entire family, and some of our meetings with families might be 40, 50, we've had as much as 60 people in a room creating a plan. Someone, if you believe from a strength-based perspective, someone's going to jump up and say, this is what we need to do, okay? It supports kinship care. Kids don't move around a lot once they're through the process. It gets very difficult cases moving towards resolution. It's very effective with substance abusing parents because, again, substance abuse affects the whole family, not just the parents involved. We're able to find more relatives and persons of color, whatever they be. They're much more inclined to participate, and they have greater sense of satisfaction all around. Okay. Now, here is the model. People ask, well, what is the model for family group? Okay. Now, this is a Oh, I'm sorry, no wonder. This is a Lakota model of family group decision making. And the whole idea of generosity is part of the dynamic in this particular model. It talks about decisions that are made from a family, bringing families back in to rejoin with the family to make the plan, presenting the plan, and there's a recording of the plan and a ceremony. These are the parts of family group decision making. Systems invite or ask folks to invite for a private meeting, for a meeting, for everyone to come together. The family defines who should be invited to this particular meeting, okay? We have to put grandma needs round-the-clock nursing care, or grandma is in need of health care, okay? What are we going to do about that? Instead of a social worker making that plan, the idea is to bring in the entire family and whoever else the family defines as part of their family together to make a plan, okay? At this, and they define where the setting is. So if it's at the church basement, at your house, at the community center, that's where the meeting is held. And everyone is introduced and what role they serve. Because many times in traditional intervention meetings, the professionals never ask who is here or never tell or define who they are, okay? There's an overview of the blessing of the children because it's so important in that particular culture that all the children are blessed through their cultural paradigm. There's an overview of the process, purpose of the meeting, goals and responsibilities of the participants. They gather information, talk about safety, talk about this family strengths, the health and safety issues, and then they have something known as a family private meeting. After all of that preliminary, and I'm going over this very quickly, after all of that preliminary information is gathered, all professionals, quote, leave the room. And the family has a private family time to discuss their plan, okay? Now, why is it important to have private family time? What do you think? Right, right, right. And we don't need to know.
That's right.
We don't need to know, right? Because there may be something that we have not captured or we have misinterpreted, and family will not talk about that unless they're amongst themselves. Now, if you are in the room, no matter how well-meaning you may be, you change the dynamic. Okay, so we support family time. And many times these family meetings are hours long. Average is between 4 and 6 hours. Yeah. Because, again, remember, we have one issue that we have determined, but there could be thousands of things and other things that are going on in the family. After they have their private meeting, the family calls us into the delivery of, they deliver to us their plan. This is our plan. And our job at that point becomes that of a servant. We are servants to the family. Okay? That our job is to make sure that that plan is successful. Whatever resources, whatever they need in order to make that plan work, that's the role. Okay? Now, we have an African-centered paradigm or model that is the same, and as you can see, a little bit different. After we talk a little bit about family group, we have the family tradition. We ask folks, what do you all normally do when you have your family reunions or you get together at the holidays or whatever? Sometimes there's a drum call, there's prayer, there's passing of, say, photos. I remember one family saying, well, we tell jokes, okay? So they do that, whatever it is, in order to make people feel this is your family. This is what's important. You are the drivers of this. And then there is, of course, in the oral history tradition, the genograms. How many of you do genograms? You have to do, yes. Well, that's not necessarily how how families operate. What's on paper really might not be how the family functions. So the oral history of the family, and it's also important for families to be empowered to hear about their own history, their own strength. We generally ask an elder to do that. Everyone in the room has to, discussing the role. The only rule is for child welfare, kid must be safe, okay? For the grandma who has to go to a nursing, needs health care, that grandma has to be safe, okay? That's the only rule. Whatever plan you come up with, that's up to the family. Everyone in the room has to identify a strength. So say if you have 40 people in the room, everyone goes around and says, this is something that is right about this family, or this is a strength. You can see how empowering that can be for family members. And then everyone breaks bread, because food is such an important part of the healing process. Whatever families identifies what they want to consume, we go out, purchase the food, you eat it with the family, and you can see many things are resolved even at that meal. It's kind of hard to be mad at the historical drug addict in your family when you're sitting down with a piece of chicken, right? I mean, it's just, clinically, it has some healing properties, as well as you begin to see people, the helpers begin to see people in a different light, okay? And we call that the meal or the repast. And then basically one of the things is the parent has the last say. What do they hope to gain out of this particular meeting? Ask, were there any questions? And then everyone leaves. There's private family time. Again, for all of these interventions in family group, there is an opportunity for private time. Family, after they have their private time, they, come back and review the plan. Give it to us, we review the plan, and begin the work with the plan. Now, the outcomes of the research has shown that children in child welfare who are involved in family group generally aren't removed from parental custody. It's a negligible amount. They do not come back into care. Low rates of reabuse. Plans are effective in resolving concerns, and people feel better. That the families that have gone through our family group decision making are the biggest advocates and cheerleaders for us. That they then become our ambassadors and go to community members and say, hey, you should ask for this particular program, okay? Now, we also, with this particular model, we don't actually do the work. We have contracted with 3 churches. They say faith-based, these are churches, okay? Because when Deacon Brown knocks on the door, you might can get in, right? Rather than social worker Brown, right? Okay, 3 churches, 1 culturally based parenting in-home service provider, and a new provider. Well, they're not new now, but a group from the community who got together and submitted a proposal, and we were able to engage with them. When we engage with people who are indigenous to the communities or the population we serve, we just find that there are better outcomes. They have a greater capacity to get in and have a better understanding of what the real needs of those families are in their own communities. So it's worked very successfully for us, and we continue to engage more and more community partners in the delivery of the service, because if it's really about helping, then it doesn't matter who's successful. It matters that we're successful, okay, as a group. All right? So that's family group in a nutshell, and family engagement. Any questions? comments? Yes.
I'll say with those models, sometimes people see things that seem like they're allowed to take in the process quickly, but what can you do to start where you are? I went to a training and we put it into practice to where we are for even a child attending an IEP meeting.
Yes.
A, you'd be surprised how many parents don't show up.
Yes.
And then B, you'd be surprised that there's only one parent who doesn't understand what's happening. But when you invite the deacon, the grandmother, the cousin who's at home and not working now, and you just ask them to come, just those numbers, you redirect the energy of the meeting, because what you're saying is a lot of people are accountable for this child's soul.
Yes.
I have to slow down, take my time, and I better remember my P's and Q's.
Yes.
And then for the juvenile justice system, a court hearing for a minor, a judge looks out in the audience and sees nobody who came, or the 80-year-old grandmother who's saying, release him to me and he'll be fine. You know, you need to jam-pack that courtroom with some people who show up and say, I can't keep him all the time, but I can have him on Saturdays for this amount of time to do yard work. The other aunt shows up and says he can come and help me with my child care. So, for some people, we're not there quite yet.
Yes.
But there's a lot of things we can start doing now, and with the safety in numbers, and somebody in a professional plan saying, and they won't be negligent either when they sign up on their paperwork. This many people were present, and that's why we made our recommendation to
Yes.
allow this child to read too.
Yes. Absolutely. If you have, and we started slow too, because there's a lot of naysayers. First one was, well, these families can't make decisions for themselves. They're not capable. But that's a very deficit-based, individualistic perspective. If you look at it from a collectivist perspective, clearly resolutions. Otherwise, we might as well just hang it up, right? If you don't believe that in the power of change or whatever. And again, they come, when they have success, they tell others. And then, you know, the word gets out and we start to produce better outcomes. And from systems, you know, now we have judges that are very much involved in the process and will recommend that this is something I would recommend to a family. This makes strength in numbers, right? And more, again, what most populations that we serve, poor, minorities, of course it works with all, but people who don't trust systems will trust this engagement strategy because you defer it to community partners to do that.
Sounds a lot what, you know, people have been calling the wraparound model.
Yes.
Like, that
Yes,
term has become very generic to the point where
Yeah.
it almost doesn't mean much what it used to mean. But
Yeah.
with the real wraparound model, and that is very, you know, everybody signs off, you agree to come back, you set timelines when to come back, so you in fact, I was working with the pilot project for, you know, the wraparound model here in California, which really came out of Kaleidoscope.
Yes.
So Chicago.
Yes, Chicago.
Carl
Yes,
Dennis,
yes,
you probably
yes.
know. He was, I guess, the pioneer. And in fact, when it first started off in California, the state would not pay you when they audited if you did not pull people together on those intervals, meetings, and have the parents sign off. They would pay you. So they were strong.
So strong,
for
yes.
supervisors and everything
Yes.
to say, we will have a consensual model with the family. They will come. They will have to sign this off. And the key players, whether it be the church people or whoever involved, need to sign off on the plan too. So it was pretty strong. And, but this has a nice little twist with the meal and everything.
Yes, and you can do it any way you want. You know, you just have to look at it how the people that you're serving, the population you serve, you have to individualize it. You know, Dennis's model, if you stay true to the model, it works wonderfully. There's been a lot of variations with it, which sometimes doesn't work. Yes.
I haven't kept up too much.
Yes.
But yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
What I was going to say, what I really appreciate around what you have discussed is, like, just in the beginning, the dialogues around some of the theoretical frameworks, you know, are so necessary.
Yes.
Not only, of course, ourselves, but our provider, community-based organizations, and then the necessity to educate and inform how it should be to me in terms of community members about this perspective,
Yes.
which I feel then really values where they are and then facilitates the engagement, because in the African American community, definitely in Contra Costa County, because of some of the cultural mistrust and those some of those issues, that a lot of African Americans are not coming out to play. Period.
Oh,
You
yes.
know, and I mean, and a lot of our policy makers that are much more higher up on the continuum, they won't come to meetings like this. They already know. Since you can't tell them nothing, you know, they won't come out and to me devalue, you know, this kind of cultural competency training. It's like, well, we already know.
Right. So if we already
it makes it
know,
yeah.
then why aren't we better off? I mean, why aren't we
Exactly.
moving
Why
forward?
aren't the community health indicators
Yes.
changing?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Very true. So if you need additional information, you certainly can contact me. I think
Where is your contact info?
I don't know. It's not on there.
No.
I thought they had something. Well, I'll just have to give it to you then. Okay. It's M. Sturdivant, S-T-U-R-D as in David, I-V as in Victor, A-N-T, at point, P-O-I-N-T, park, P-A-R-K, .edu. Okay.
And then your training this afternoon is going to be?
On Inawa Umbutu. I love to say that. Inawa Umbutu is a community engagement model that I created to address disproportionality rates of African American male children in child welfare. Yes. How do we stop the flow of African American children in child welfare? Okay. And some people would term it the prison, industrialized prison industry. But we know that when you start off as a child in a deficit in a system, we already know what the outcome is for our children. And for children, black children and black boys, you graduate from foster care to detention to homelessness to jail or death. And this is following, you can see my passion, I guess, I'm a little bit angry, following spending millions of dollars on children, and we still, you know, have not moved in a direction that is healthy for our children. And the, you know, face of child welfare is primarily an African American or Latino child, and depending on your demographics, most often it's a boy. And culturally, we know, well, let's not even say culturally, psychodynamics, if your men are disenfranchised, your family, the community is gone.
That's right.
So you have to uplift the men in order to move the community forward. And Inawa means to lift up, and Mbutu means I am because we are.
That's right.
Right? Yeah, so gave it a ethnic name so that it doesn't morph into anything else.
So it doesn't
Inawa.
become people of color, huh?
That's right. It's Inawa Umbutu. I was calling it the Inawa, and then people were getting the word out, and some, in fact, her husband, they were from, the Republic of the Congo, yes. And she said, say this again. And I said, Inawa Umbutu, and she formed my mouth. She said, yes, Inawa, so, Umbutu. So Yeah, that's what I'll be talking about. The engagement strategy that we use to get black men to the table to help other black boys, to help black boys.
When are you gonna be doing that?
At 1 o'clock, I believe. Is it 1 o'clock? Yes, 1 o'clock.
There's some sessions tomorrow as well.
Pardon?
Are there some other sessions?
Yes, there in the morning we're spiritual. I'll do spiritual life mapping, spirituality and parenting outcomes, how to use spirituality, and it's also it's primarily for the perspective, because I only try to teach what I know. I know black people, okay? Because I get very much offended when, you know, although it can cross over other cultures, but how important is the use of spirituality in the delivery of service? That I think as systems, we have missed the mark when you're talking about dealing with minority groups and not talking about spirituality. You can't work with black folks and not talk about spirituality. Yeah, and they say, oh, well, that didn't work, that intervention didn't work. It's because you didn't get to the root of some of the, strategies. Well.
A lot of people, well, in our community around Oakland, have roots
Mm-hmm.
in like the South.
Yes.
I think America, black folks in this country, I think.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
And then
I'm actually from the
Yes.
Northeast too, so,
Yes.
so
It's
it's a different dynamic.
Right.
It's more generations more removed
Right.
in the Northeast than maybe
That's interesting.
in California,
Mhm.
but I think it's true all the way around.
Right.
Really, it's everywhere.
And for all groups, really, when you're talking about the helping profession, like mental health, you can't talk about mental health without talking about spiritual health. You see, and there are movements now in the mental health community for all groups to talk about spirituality as part of the healing process. So we talk about that. And then in the afternoon is the last one is liberal philosophy, but conservative case practice. We talk about a lot about these liberal ideas, but they're really very racist, sexist, and classist in orientation. And I'll just be discussing how that is manifested in ways to eradicate those paradigms in your own systems. So.
Could you give us your email one more time?
Yes, M. Sturdivant, S-M. Sturdivant, S-T-U-R-D as in David, I, V as in Victor, A-N-T, at pointpark.edu.
And if you're actually registered, we'll email
Thank
our
you.
email address
Okay.
to you all as well.
Thank you. All right. Yeah. It was a pleasure. And I hope you got something from it. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I hope somebody see you again. I mean, I hope. Yeah.